Ladies and gentlemen, I'm now very pleased to welcome Phil Fitz-Gerald to the stage for a conversation about digital reporting in the UK. Some of you are experts, so I guess we might have some hard questions.
Oh, crumbs.
And for some people, this will be new. But many of you will know Phil, not least because until relatively recently, he's being a member of our board of directors. But Phil has had a leadership role at the FRC for some time, and we're going to hear about your career journey, so I'm not going to bore people with your bio. I'm sorry about that. But perhaps we could start with that. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you end up at the FRC? What's been your journey as a professional?
Okay, so first of all, delighted to be here. This is my third Data Amplified, and I'm delighted to be back. It's also nice to be in Madrid, where it's a bit warmer than it is in London at the moment, where we've got a bit of a cold snap. My background, so I am an accountant. I started off at KPMG, where I was in the audit practice for 10 years. I ended up actually then moving into their sort of professional practice department, so giving technical advice on financial reporting matters and on auditing matters as well. I then left KPMG and actually set up my own training practice, and it was at the time when IFRS was being implemented in the UK, and also Sarbanes-Oxley was coming in for many, which impacted many UK companies. So I had the privilege of spending 5 years training people on the implementation of that, which was great fun, but also quite interesting to implement new standards, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. And then I joined the FRC 15 years ago now, and I started off, I'll talk a little bit more about what the FRC does. The FRC really acts in the public interest in the UK. It's the UK regulator for the accountancy, actuarial, and auditing professions. What it does is it sets standards for those professions. So we set accounting standards, we set auditing standards, we set actuarial standards, and we set ethical standards as well. But then we also regulate to ensure that those within our scope are meeting those standards. So we're both the standard setter, a bit like GRI, but also the enforcer as well. So we have a supervision and enforcement department as well. And actually, when I started off at the FRC, I started in the what was called the audit inspection unit. So we went out and inspected auditors and how well they did their audits. And then I moved into enforcement. My role there was as case examiner, so looking at the bad stuff that comes in and seeing what we need to do about that. And then for the last 6 or 7 years, I've actually headed up something called the FRC Lab, which was quite an experimental thing where we were really looking at driving up the quality of reporting beyond regulation. So coming back to some of the comments earlier about actually identifying what investors were looking for in corporate reporting and working with companies actually to deliver that. And we delivered a number of different sort of topics around climate reporting and some of the areas that investors were particularly interested in. And then more recently, I've taken on a new role, which is Director of Digital Reporting and Taxonomies, which I guess we're going to talk a little bit more about. During our time in the lab, one of the things that we looked at is not only the content of reporting, but actually how reporting was delivered and what technologies were used to do that. And that's where I first came into contact with XBRL, got to know it a bit more, and actually could really see the potential for XBRL as a communication tool. When we were in the lab, we were very focused on how are investors getting the information they need to make decisions. And I could really see that XBRL was a way of making that process so much more efficient, so much more effective, and a lot of kind of potential in that. So that's a bit about me and how I came to XBRL, and then I was fortunate enough to join the board back in 2018, and then recently rolled off. So very interested in that area. The other aspect I just wanted to note about the FRC's responsibilities is that for a long time we've actually enabled digital reporting in the UK, back since actually 2011, 2012, sometime around that. when HMRC came to us and said, actually, we want to digitize reporting to the tax authorities. And that's when we started getting involved in developing the taxonomies. Because we set the accounting standards in the UK, it made sense for us to develop the taxonomy, which would support companies as they reported to HMRC. Now, that has evolved a lot over time, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But that's kind of where it all started for the FRC, and I came to it a little bit later on in my career when I joined the lab.
Thank you. So there's been a lot of changes in the UK over the last few years, and indeed a much promised set of reforms around the FRC itself. And there's potentially a name change in the future, but there's been some organisational change. So the FRC Labs experiment has come to an end, at least for the moment, and you're now heading up this new group, which is looking at digital reporting and taxonomy. And I think that's fairly unique. Not sure you have counterparts yet in similar organisations. So tell us a little bit about the way you see that team, what you see it doing, and the way you see that evolving.
Yeah, well, I think it's partly a continuation of the work that we were doing in the lab and the work that the taxonomies team was doing in the past at the FRC in enabling digital reporting in the UK. So it's partly a continuation, but by creating a unique department really focused on this, I think it's a recognition that there needed to be increased focus on really kind of driving up the quality of data, but also a recognition that things are evolving so fast in the world of XBRL. You know, it's not just accounting data for reporting to tax authorities now. We've now got public reporting to our securities regulator, which we enable. We're developing we have developed taxonomies for reporting for charities, for example. So there's so many more things sort of happening, and so many more things that are likely to happen in the future with sustainability standards developing and potentially digitizing that. So there's quite a lot going on in that space, and this team is really going to be set up to focus on that, to focus on data quality and really take things forward in this space.
Thank you. So the UK, for those of you unaware, has been at the forefront of a lot of this for a long time. There's already mandatory reporting for every company in the country. More than 3 million have to file their inline XBRL documents to the UK Tax Authority, His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, I have to remember. Also, that same information, or a substantial subset of that information, goes to Companies House, the business registrar in the UK. So there's that connection between those two regulators, although the Companies House stuff has not been mandated to date. Yet. Then another regulator, the FCA, mandates the ESEF framework in the UK. And of course, the Bank of England and the prudential regulator within the Bank of England with the FCA collect huge amounts of information. Something like 80% of the bank regulators' data arrives today in XBRL. So presumably you've got to coordinate amongst all those regulators. So tell us a little bit about that. Is that part of the role? How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I would emphasize is that we work very collaborative in developing the taxonomies that enable digital reporting in the UK. We work very collaboratively across all of the relevant regulators in the UK. And to give a bit of a sort of picture of how that has developed, it really started back in 2011-12 with HMRC and Companies House coming together and starting to think about, you know, digitization of corporate reporting, tax returns and so forth. And then gradually over time, various other regulators have come in and said, actually, this looks like a good idea. We want you to digitize our mandates as well. So we now have the Charities Commission involved with us. The government 5 or 6 years ago started to mandate streamlined energy and carbon reporting. So we produced a taxonomy to support streamlined energy and carbon reporting. TCFD then came on board within the last 3 or 4 years, so we digitized that. And we also, because we write accounting standards for Ireland as well as the UK, We also support the Irish revenue, so we produce a taxonomy for the Irish revenue as well. And much more recently, the FCA with the ESEF mandate in the UK have come on board as well. And the way all of that works is that all of those regulators are part of the due process for developing those taxonomies. They sign it off, it goes through our process, and we work very collaboratively together on that. So it's very much a collaboration of regulators in the UK developing these taxonomies. It's centered in the FRC because we issue the accounting standards, which are obviously the taxonomies then support.
Thank you. So although there's a huge amount of information that comes in a digital form within the UK context, like many other jurisdictions, data quality is a key consideration. There are several tools at your disposal. There are data quality rules, there's assurance, there is enforcement, there's just nudging. What are some of the tools that you're using? What is your focus in this area of data quality? Because it is very clear that for companies to really take that shift away from an entirely paper brain, mindset into a digital one, they have to be focused on quality, and then users have to be confident about quality. So what are your tools in that area?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it starts with the taxonomies themselves. If you've got a taxonomy which is usable, we have guidance and education, then that's more likely to result in data quality. But the story doesn't end there. And over the last 3 years, during the period I was in the lab, we have started to look at, or we've carried out sort of supervisory type reviews of listed company reporting. We've issued 3 reports which sort of set out how we've seen data quality improve over those 3 years, what the issues are, and provided guidance to companies about how they can raise data quality for listed company reporting. I think it's fair to say that is going to be an increased area of focus for this new team, and it's something that we're working on doing a bit more around, because we recognise that increasingly the data is being used in a digital way, and therefore to encourage that we have to give the market confidence that they can rely on the data, or certainly take steps to drive up the quality of data to enable that to happen. So there's certainly going to be an increased focus on that. But it has been an area that we've looked at in the past. It's just that increased focus that we'll be using as we've got this mandate and this new team.
So one of the challenges, I'm just going off piece to you slightly, just to follow up on that, Phil. One of the challenges in the UK is that you've got a small conflict between the requirements around what the Europeans call the Transparency Directive, but has been moved into UK law, and local national companies' laws, means that there is a situation today in which a company is able to provide a PDF, a paper version of their disclosures before they can provide their digital ones, which goes to relevance, it goes to quality, it goes to the focus that companies will give to those disclosures. Do you see that as part of your remit, or is that a broader thing? How is that problem going to get resolved in time?
So I think it's a broader thing in terms of regulatory responsibility. So the rules, the individual rules, are obviously set by the relevant regulator. So the securities regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, sets the rules for listed company filing. But we work very collaboratively with them. And one of the things that we've recently issued, you may well have seen, is we issued a discussion paper which looked at opportunities for future digital reporting in the UK. The comment period is just closed, but if anyone does want to
We're
send
going to put it
something,
in late.
Yeah, I know we haven't got yours yet, John. But if anyone wants to put in a late a submission, then feel free to do it. But it's asking those kind of questions. How do we take the current mandates in the UK, and how do those evolve in the future? How do we make the most of XBRL, of digital reporting in the future? So it very much asks those kind of questions of, the paper version versus do those two things come together and so forth. And what we'll do with the responses in that paper is circulate those to the relevant regulator and then have discussions with them about how we take certain things forward. The other thing I think I wanted to talk a little bit about is something called the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, which was passed a couple of years ago in the UK. And what that's going to do, you mentioned earlier that 3 million companies currently report to HMRC in the current mandate. Of course, reporting to a tax authority is private, so that data isn't accessible to the public. What the ECCT Act will do is actually mandate digital reporting to the registrar, Companies House, and that information will then be accessible to everyone for those 3 million companies. Now that will happen in time. It takes time to implement that. But again, that emphasizes the need for us to focus on driving up that quality, working with the regulators who are responsible for those mandates to support them.
But that's a nice lead on to my next question, because I think you've had a press release and a few comments about this in the last few weeks, but I gather that the FRC is working on some tools for regulators, and I wonder whether you can tell us about what you're thinking about, what you're hoping to achieve in that context.
Yeah, certainly. So I've talked a little bit about taxonomies, which are the enablers for digital reporting. I've talked a little bit about how we're going to drive up quality. But also, if we're going to do all of this, actually we need to think about how that data is going to be accessed and used in the most efficient and effective possible way, because that's the great advantage of XBRL. And one of the things that we're working on at the moment is a project looking at exactly that, developing the tools to be able to use that data more effectively. And there's two aspects to the project that we're working on. One is to create a viewer for the UK, which will enable the public to be able to view XBRL data. I don't need to talk to you about what an XBRL viewer is, but we have to develop one which is compliant with government standards for security and accessibility and so forth. So we're working very hard to develop that viewer and hope to be able to release that next year. So that's on the one side, that's giving access to the public to this good XBRL data. And then we're also developing a regulatory toolkit which is going to be available to the regulators that I've talked about in the UK. And that is going to enable kind of bulk analysis, if you like, of XBRL data. So in the past, when we've done, for example, where we've done quality reviews of listed company XBRL reporting, we've done it in the old-fashioned auditor way, pick a sample, a risk-based sample, go through each individual report and review the quality of that individual report. In the future with this tool, in the near future with this tool, we're going to be able to do that much more systematically, much more electronically, so that we can say, so that we can identify outliers from a whole population of entities, which I think is the real power of XBRL in this. So there are two aspects of that. So the viewer side and the regulatory toolkit, which will help us deliver good quality or support good quality reporting.
This is really good news. For those of you who have ever been to the Companies House website, you can find lots and lots of inline XBRL documents, but they're there as a zip file and you can download them. Guys, it's a web page. We want to be able to see it. You can't even see it, let alone seeing it in a viewer. So hopefully that will improve things. That'll be just terrific. Thank you very much for that initiative. Tell us a little bit more about the toolkit, because I think there's lots of regulators around the world that maybe don't do all the things that they could do with the structured information that they receive. What are the kinds of things that you hope to be able to achieve? I very much like this idea of being able to focus on cohorts of data and look for the outliers.
Yeah.
Is that the main part of this?
So the great thing one of the things about the FRC that's really great is that we've got a multitude of things that we're doing that I talked about, setting accounting standards, setting auditing standards, setting ethical standards, setting actuarial standards, and also we're the authors of the Corporate Governance Code and the Stewardship Code, which is used in the UK as well. And what we've been doing as in developing this regulatory toolkit product is actually looking at the use cases within the FRC and within all of the other regulators to use that data more effectively. So for example, in our standard setting activities, we can actually look at, how many companies across a certain population is using a specific tag that relates to FRS 102, a particular section of FRS 102. That's going to be really useful data for the accounting policy team to be able to say, well, okay, actually, a lot of people are using that tag, or even a lot of people are using, you can't use extensions for FRS 102, but
still,
you get the point. That might be an area which might help inform our standard setting process. So that's just one example, but there are so many different examples, within our audit supervision team, for example. Maybe we could look at the key audit matters that auditors publish, and actually look at how that's spread across different entities. So there's a lot of sort of use cases that we've been exploring, and we've been doing having the same conversations with our co-regulators to look at what are their use cases. The FCA might be focused on market abuse or whatever it is, in looking at that. The other thing that we do where there's going to have really good relevance is we currently review about 200 sets of accounts a year, PDFs, and actually we could look at how we can take the data and actually look at themes and really direct our regulatory activities to those areas of greater risk. So there's enormous potential for using the toolkit to be able to do some of this stuff.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and all power to your arm. Looking forward to it. I would point out for other regulators in the room that the FRC has got a dedicated international relations group person, is it? But also very accessible. Phil's here, but their team is terrific. So do feel free to interact with a team that's very open. One of the other things that you need to be doing is looking at the horizon. What are the technologies that you have your eyes on? Is that a list that's bigger than just AI, or is the focus on AI? What are your thoughts in that field?
So for quite a while, actually, the FRC has been looking at how different technologies impact corporate reporting, both from a production perspective, how can technology help, producing the annual report, but also how can technology help users, investors particularly, to be able to analyze that information. So we've looked at different technologies actually in the past, including blockchain, AI, virtual reality, augmented reality, video. We've published reports on all of these things. And one of the areas that the team, as it currently is formed, is going to be looking at is emerging technologies and how they impact our regulatory activities. Now, clearly, AI is a big one at the moment, and we don't have any sort of formal regulatory responsibilities in relation to AI, but we do need to consider how AI is going to impact on our regulated community. So how our auditing standards, are going to remain relevant where audit firms are using AI to do audit procedures or so forth. So we need to be considering that. We need to be monitoring the developments in AI and considering how those developments will impact our regulatory activities.
And do you think you'll be using AI yourselves, both, I don't know, in the taxonomy development, in that analysis that you're doing? Come along to the conversation on Thursday about AI and in the regulatory context. But how do you see that impacting the FRC? And in what mode? Is that very much like a co-pilot thing, or you're going to be leaving some things to the AIs, or don't you know yet?
I think the answer is we don't know yet. We're obviously, like any other organisation and regulator, starting to look at what AI can do for us in terms of our regulatory activities, but also the impact that AI has got across our regulatory community. I think it's possibly too early to say, and actually one of the things I heard earlier from Joe when he was speaking is it's great to learn, and I'm looking forward actually to some of the things I'm going to learn over the next couple of days about AI, how AI interacts with structured data and so forth. But it's an interesting journey to be on at the moment. Certainly something we're looking at.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm sure the audience has heard too many questions from me. please use this opportunity to quiz Phil. There are some hard questions that you can ask.
No.
Yeah, I'm sure some of them can ask some hard questions. So who's got a question for Phil? I can see Mark sitting there going, who's going to be first? Do I have to be first? No questions? Come on. Well, I've got one more, so that's fine. So we won't hold you to this. But how do you see the FRC evolving as it better understands not just AI, but the role of structured information across this broad marketplace and how that could impact what you're doing? I mean, the idea that it could help direct your detailed analysis of particular companies, that's like low-hanging fruit, right? In a longer time horizon, what are some of the things that you can imagine that changing the way things that work inside the FRC or that change the people inside the FRC?
So I think, first of all, it's a very difficult question to answer, but thank you for asking it. So I think looking forward, there are going to be increasing demands on companies to report information, sustainability information, and so forth. And actually, one of the areas that you talked earlier about how the FRC is sort of developing into a new organisation called Argo, which is the new organisation that we're moving into. One of the areas that might entail is actually reviewing the whole annual. At the moment, we review kind of the financial statements, if you like. In the future, it might encompass, reviewing a wider set of information. And I don't think you can continue doing that without using technology, without using structured data to be able to do that kind of analysis that we were talking about. So I think increasingly we'll be wanting to use that's why we're developing the regulatory toolkit to enable that as things develop, as more things become digitized, as we get access to more data, that's really going to help our regulatory activities going forward.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing your viewpoints about something that I think every regulator in the world is going through at one level or another, but really welcome the extent to which the FRC is open and public about aspects of this. You can't tell us everything. I was really interested in the FT's articles. No. Is there anything that you would ask other regulators or other members of this community to let you guys know about? This is an opportunity to plug your comment letter, but plug for comment letters or anything else that you would like to be collaborating on with some of your peers.
So I think what I'd look for from this community is helping us to identify how technology, it's one of the reasons I really enjoy coming to these conferences, is learning how new technology can help us facilitate our own regulatory activities, making that more efficient, more effective, or etc. But also how we can make the data more accessible to the users. Ultimately, the FRC serves the user community. And any help we can have from this community to make the data more accessible, more available, and more useful to users is really where we need support and help, and we need to learn from you on.
Thank you very much. Please join with me in thanking Phil Fitz-Gerald. That's great. Thank you very much.